Hello, I'm Geraint Hardy and welcome to the Healthy Work in Wales podcast brought to you by Public Health Wales. Over the series, we'll be chatting to experts about a range of workplace health issues, empowering employers with the knowledge and support they need to help keep the Welsh workforce healthy and in work. In this episode, we're talking about absence management. Sickness absence can significantly impact on the performance and productivity of an organisation. Stats show that over 140 million working days in the UK were lost because of sickness or injury. That's an equivalent of 4.4 days for each worker. Dr. Chris Price is my guest, and as a GP, Chris has got significant experience of supporting patients who are off sick and using the Fit Note effectively to manage return to work after sickness absence. Chris, welcome. The stats are pretty stark. Why is it important for employers to manage sickness absence well?
Well, I think there's a number of aspects to that. Firstly, what we do know about the individual and the population as a whole is that work is good for them. It provides a focus to their week, and people in work are generally healthier than people not in work. Obviously, there are the other side of the coin for the employers who want a healthy workforce in place with only sickness absence taken when absolutely necessary, but actually being productive and happy in their workplace.
Yeah, happiness is always key in any form of work, of course, Chris. So what steps should an employer be taking to manage absence then?
Well, I think that there's a number of things that we could look at. Absence is inevitable for all of us. We all get ill from time to time. We all hurt ourselves from time to time, and sometimes we need to have operations, etc., which takes us away from the workplace. I feel that employers should be managing absence proactively, looking at the benefit for their workforce, but also the individual that's potentially unwell.
Let's move on to a real life scenario then, if you can, Chris. Let's pretend I'm a director of a corporate cleaning company and one of my staff gets in touch and they say, I'm too unwell to work today. What should I then do as the director?
You know, we all sometimes wake up with a sore throat, cough, high temperature, and don't feel up to work. And you know, you're a director of a cleaning company, therefore your employees are doing physical work, and they may not be physically capable of carrying out their workload. Then you go on to the more, as we know, mental health and musculoskeletal conditions, and then I would look at the question: what does my employee actually physically do when they're in work? As a GP, often I say to somebody, what's your job? And they say, I'm so-and-so. And I say, but what do you actually do when you're in work? Because that's key into looking at their medical condition and whether or not they're physically or mentally capable of carrying that out at the moment.
And in general, when you have that conversation then in your surgery, do kind of your patients feel that they've got the support of the workplace?
So some people find their workplace very, very supportive, particularly when they have a good health record and something unpleasant happens, you know, a family illness, a family death, etc. And then other people keep telling me they get badgered to be going back to work. And you know, honestly, I think that it is yes and no in answer to your question, because you can actually see the employer's point of view as well as the employee's point of view. Obviously, as a GP, I'm the patient's advocate. And I think that being the patient's advocate, we're in a difficult position when we're talking about sickness absence, because we want to do the best for the patient, but equally we realise that perhaps the best for the patient is getting them back into some sort of work, because it does help both mentally and physically.
We did touch on kind of, sickness and people, sickies, I suppose is the term, isn't it? Pulling a sickie. If you're an employer and kind of you don't believe the absence is genuine, what kind of evidence should people be getting then?
I think the answer is that you can't be doing that. I think you look at somebody's sick record. You said in the stats at the beginning that 4.4 days each year are lost to the workforce for each worker. And I think that if you had somebody who was regularly, inverted commas, pulling a sickie, close inverted commas, you might want to address that when they're back in work and fit, as to why they are taking more sickness absence than everybody else. And that's probably as far as you can go with the short-term sickness. The longer-term sickness, then I think that you should be talking to occupational health and thinking, okay, is there something here that is a barrier to this person being part of my workforce? And occupational health are the experts there.
Okay, and when it comes to absence, I suppose, is there any difference when it comes to absence caused by an injury at work or perhaps absence due to a pregnancy-related kind of condition?
In the first instance, no. The person is sick, cannot work, and therefore, de facto, they are absent. They're absent. Sorry, but when we actually look then at the health and safety issues around an injury at work, and there's lots of things that can cause injury at work. If you fall over and break your arm, you can do that at home as well as in work, and it may not be workplace related. You might find that you have a manual worker who's keeping getting back pain, and you might need to think, well, is this job suitable for this person? And of course, there may be something that's gone wrong with a piece of machinery or something that is actually a health and safety issue. The other, the pregnancy related is interesting because you, of course, have maternity leave. And if you have a pregnancy related condition coming towards the end of your pregnancy, it may be that maternity leave will need to be triggered early.
And with regards to my next question then, what's the best way to manage an employee's longer term or repeated sickness absence from work? Those that perhaps need to manage chronic conditions like diabetes or recovering from cancer, for example.
So I think that would be almost certainly employee specific. Particularly if you have somebody who wants to get back into the workforce, but yet has an impediment to them performing in either the job that they were doing or the job that you're planning for them. And that is when you really need an occupational health advisor who needs to look at the individual, possibly get a report from their own doctor to know exactly the medical condition and how that medical condition affects the individual, and then looking at what the employee can do.
We did touch on mental health earlier on, but mental health is such a big issue these days. I think it's around a third of absence from work is caused from mental health. What more can employers do to support staff with mental health conditions to actually stay in work?
That's sort of fairly individual, but there are generalizations that you can make here. If you look at what is written on the employee's fit note, and if it mentions work-related stress, then obviously there's a little flashing light there that tells you that this person is feeling uncomfortable in work for some reason or another, and that might be worth exploring with them. If they have mental health issues unrelated to the workplace, keeping in touch but keeping at a distance is quite important, particularly if the person is motivated to work but just cannot do it at the moment. I think that there are a number of pointers that I would suggest. I mean, first of all, that keeping in touch, the not particularly keeping them away from the workplace if it's not workplace related, because they socialize with their work colleagues, and losing that socialization might be an issue in itself. Also, as and when they get better, and they're looking at coming back, that transition from being off to being back in work is a really important one. I see patients who go back to work because they're motivated to go back to work. They walk in through the door, and every single person in the place says to them at a different time, "Oh, nice to see you back," and they end up in floods of tears sometimes. So that gradual reintroduction to the workplace, perhaps a visit um, a week before they're going to start back again, might be important. And then also reducing the time period that they're in work and possibly uncomfortable, and then gradually building it up.
What about such things as like back pain? I'm one that suffers from back pain myself, and that accounts for around 17% of fit notes. What more can employers do about that then?
Back pain is extremely common, and most people who've had back pain at some stage, obviously there's a difference between back pain that's an issue and back pain that's an issue every third Thursday or whatever. Also, that would very much depend on the workplace, what the employee is expected to do. And if you have somebody who is a gas fitter who has to twist and turn and get under things and lift things, then even minimal back pain might be a significant handicap to that job. Even somebody in an office, when they have significant back pain, need the ability to either stand or sit at any stage. Oftentimes, you need to get up and walk around to get your back moving, and then at other times then you need to take the weight off your back. You need to be sitting. So employers should really sort of take into account what the employee does, whether or not there are changes that could be made to their workplace. Manual work is different, obviously, and if you have to get under a sink and change an overflow pipe, then you're going to have to be able to bend. So therefore, the adaptations are more difficult, perhaps. However, you've got workmates, and can they do the work under the sink, and you can do the work on top of the sink? It's that sort of thing that the employers need to be thinking about, is working around the employee's problem rather than sort of making it a huge obstacle.
And I suppose from an employee's point of view, being kind of confident to have that conversation with your employers as well.
Yes, and that's again is where the fit note can help, because we have the opportunity in the fit note, obviously, to type in free text into the fit note and explain what the employee cannot do and what the employee can do, which is more important.
Yeah, we've mentioned the fit note a few times now. So for those that don't know what one actually is, explain to us what is a fit note and what's in the fit note.
So until a few years ago, we all had sick notes. You were either in work or you had a small piece of paper that told your employer that you weren't fit for work at that time. And the difference between that and the fit note is the recognition that employees are fit for some part of their work as opposed to unfit for another part of their work. So giving the employers the nod that Mrs. Jones can actually sit and do her typing job, but actually needs somebody to bring the paper to her because she can't lift at the moment, is really, really, really important. Whereas with the old-fashioned sick note, you were either fit for your whole job or you were unfit. There wasn't the opportunity to tell the employer that this employee is actually fit to do some part of their work, but cannot do the other part of their work.
So if you're an employer and you give it a fit note, what should you do then?
I think that you should read it. That's the obvious answer. But you might be able to read it and get some sort of idea of what the employee actually will not be able to do. So if you had one, for instance, which said hip replacement, you're not going to see that employee for a few months. If you've got somebody who's written stress at work, then I would want to investigate that. I would want to find out why my employee was feeling stress at work. And, it really is looking at why the employee has been given a note that says they're not fit for work, and whether there's anything that you as the employer can do to help that employee in returning to the workplace, which we know is a good thing for them.
Yeah. And what's the difference then, Dr. Chris, between a note saying the person is not fit for work and one saying the person is maybe fit for work? And are there different steps to be taken with each one?
We now have all of our fit notes are now computer generated, and there's a little tick box that says this person may be fit for work given that. And then you have some choices, and it's workplace adaptations, a phased return to work, altered hours, and you have a free text box then in which you can type what sort of adaptations would be suitable for this individual. So although we are not occupational health doctors as GPs, we actually know our patients, we know their illnesses, we know to some extent their limitations. What we actually lack is the knowledge of their workplace. And that's why occupational health, in conjunction with the medical treatment that I'm giving, is really important in workplace health.
What should individuals as an employee and an employer do if they don't understand the advice on it?
One thing the employer shouldn't do is try and contact the doctor, the patient's doctor directly. Because of confidentiality, we cannot discuss that. But they could ask their employee to contact their doctor to clarify something that's not quite clear. Or secondly, they could ask for a medical report with my patient, their employee's consent.
And if someone's kind of obviously gone through this process with the fit note and everything's going well and they're looking to return to work, should they get a fit note to state that they are fit for work then? Is that part of the procedure as well? No. Okay.
No, that has also changed. We used to have the old sick note, and then they're not sick anymore, and they weren't allowed to go back before then. But now I can give a fit note for, let's say, a 2-week period. The employee becomes well after 10 days. They can go back to work then without an alteration to that note.
And what about if an individual wants to return to work before the end of a not for fit work note, which you've given? Can they, even if they're not 100% fit, or kind of if they just feel like they're ready to go back, can they go back?
That's a nice question. I like the concept of being 100% fit. As I'm aging a little bit, I probably don't feel 100% fit most of the time, but I'm still in work. Joking aside, I think that people do need to understand that sometimes people come back to work while they still have symptoms of whatever has kept them off work. And this is what I was talking earlier about adaptations, reduced time in work or whatever. And some people can work when they're not 100% fit. There's no reason that somebody shouldn't be 90% fit, 80% fit and still working.
What if a fit note says an employee's job may be affecting their health? If the job is the one causing the issues, I mean, that's quite a serious kind of situation then, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that we would need to separate those into the various conditions that people might have. Let's take an odd one. Somebody with migraine who works on a computer, there may be sort of things like filters and screens that you need to be thinking about. Somebody with back pain who works in a manual job, and then, of course, if the note actually says stress at work, then I think that there's a duty on the employer to find out whether the stress at work is because the individual can't cope with their work currently, or whether there is a problem in the workplace. And workplace bullying is quite often what patients will tell us that they have experienced, and that's why they can't go to work. And the other one is talking behind people's backs, and people don't like that, and they let it build up, and then all of a sudden the floodgates open, and they're stressed and unwell, and there's not much that you can do about that. Employers, it's a very difficult situation when you do have that type of workplace classroom mentality almost, because you might not even know about it. But certainly if it does say stress at work or back pain caused by work, you do actually need to take a step back, look at what the employee is doing, look at their working environment, look at the tools that they're using, and see if there's something that you can do to facilitate the return to work.
Let's talk about supporting employees to return to work then. Let's be positive. They're ready. They want to go back to work. What is Fit for Work and how can employers access this?
So Fit for Work is a website, government-sponsored, at fitforwork.org. It's got an advice hub, live chat with advisors, and you can ask questions, which they'll give you, as they quote, free, expert and impartial advice to anyone looking for help with issues around health and work. It's a very easy website to utilize, and the advice on it seems to me at first glance to be very sound for the employer's point of view.
And I suppose the FitNote help employers manage that return to work process as well. The FitNote plays a key part in that as well.
I think so. And one of the conversations that I have sometimes when patients are looking at sort of medium term to longer term sick is that they've had that conversation with occupational health. We've asked them to come and get a FitNote so that they can show the employer that if you want this person to be back in work, what you need is a new chair. What you need is to stop them fixing plumbing underneath the sink, or so on and so forth. And then the employer can make a decision over whether they can make those adjustments to that job safely. And if they can, then the employee can come back to work.
What if they can't, Chris?
Well, if they can't, then the FitNote becomes, in effect, inverted commas, a sick note, a not fit for work note. If you can't make the adjustments that are suggested on the note, it then acts as a not fit for work note.
So we're going back to, I suppose, something you touched on earlier, a kind of a phased return, if appropriate, and if that is appropriate, who decides that? I suppose is the big question.
I think it's a triple whammy, that one. I think that certainly as a GP, I would be advising people as to whether I felt they could go back to full-time work, or whether, as we said earlier, they're 80% fit and therefore perhaps would only work 60% of the time. I don't know. It's individual dependent. I've got people who go back to work very, very shortly after operations, and other people who take a long time to recuperate. And then thirdly is obviously workplace based, what the employer can actually reasonably do to help this person back into work, and whether or not working shortened or different hours is possible in the various rotas that they have in the workplace.
And what about employers then? If they're listening to this now, what are your top tips for managing absence effectively within an organisation?
Okay, well, I think that first of all, you need to have policies in place and trained staff to deal with those policies, so that immediately when somebody tells you that they're off on ill health, you have the knowledge that, right, this is what happens after so many days, this is what happens after a week, and this is what happens when it's going to be longer term. And staff should follow the policies. It's very well having a policy in place, but it's Mr. Jones, he's all right, we don't need to do that. I think that you do need to be fair and equal with all employees. So I think the policy is number one. I think that when somebody is off on the longer term sick, I think there's about keeping in touch, but actually what you're not doing is pressurizing that person to go back to work. There's the open offer of, look, we know you're not well. You may come into work and see everyone if you wish. Is a really healthy thing, particularly if you've got somebody who's on, let's say, a planned illness, having a hip replacement, for instance. Then they might actually want to come in and show the office that they can actually walk around with crutches at the moment, and that would be a very positive thing. The other thing that you should do then is to take the context of the employee and their workplace into account. So you read the content of the fit note. If you have occupational health reports, read them. If you have a doctor's report, a GP's report, read it. Try and understand what that employee can do. And it is this, it's can do. But then also recognize what the employee can't do, and you might consider adaptation in the workforce. And I think when somebody's off sick, I think that we do all need to be a little bit compassionate around this. And, yes, it makes everybody else busier. Yes, this bit of work I wouldn't have had to do if Dr. Price was in work. But, knuckle down, they'll do the same for you if the same thing happened. And I think that, there is an awful lot of guilt sometimes around sickness absence, particularly if it's unexpected. If somebody's never been on the sick, you often get that. I've never been on the sick. And then you sort of say, well, look, you're going to need a hip replacement. You're going to have to be on the sick for 3 months. And that sometimes, accepting that somebody is necessarily on the sick is really important.
And then let's turn to the workers then before we kind of release you, Chris, and we really appreciate your time right now. What are the responsible steps to managing your own sickness, if you like, if you're a worker?
I mean, first of all, if you have something that you're going to pass around the whole workforce, don't go into work. I think that's number one. So if you had diarrhea or vomiting and you worked in catering, for instance, you're not in work, and you need to take advice as to when it's safe to come back to work. So there's responsible steps around the illness. Secondly, it's probably a little bit of self-examination, and that will be obviously contextual to the patient. Do we actually need to think about a different direction in my career? Can I actually still work as that plumber? Or do I need to be sort of thinking, right, okay, I need to be looking at perhaps being the foreman or whatever? There's that sort of responsibility to your own health. We know that work is good for people. It's good for their finances. It's good for their health. It's good for their self-esteem. But sometimes there are jobs that you are no longer physically capable of doing. And perhaps it is one step backwards. Okay, let's look at what I'm doing. What can I do? What can't I do? I've said about occupational health experts, but the expert about the patient is the patient themselves, because they'll be able to tell you what they can do and what they can't do comfortably. And I think that's one of the things that they can give to the conversation. Well, I can't do that lifting anymore. And I think that's your responsibility as an employee, as a patient, to tell people that this is why I can't do it. I can't do that. My back hurts, and I'm put out of action for a day if I do that lifting. So don't make me lift, and I'll be in work more often. It's that sort of responsibility, I think.
Dr. Chris, I can't thank you enough for your time today, and I really appreciate everything you've done. It's been really informative, so thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Now, I'm sure we've only touched the surface of this topic, so those employers seeking more advice and guidance should visit the Healthy Work in Wales website, where there's a variety of support services and best practice guidance. Healthy Work in Wales have also created a Fit Notes training module to help employers understand how they can best be used. That can be found on the Business Wales website, and you can find the links for both of those websites in the notes that accompany this podcast. I'm Geraint Hardy, and this is the Healthy Work in Wales podcast for Public Health Wales. Thanks for joining us. Diolch yn fawr.